Well, it's been a couple of years since I've been down here to visit you. You probably didn't miss me, but I'm glad to be back here again. For those that weren't in Sabbath school class, those last 2 years I had 2 strokes, and the first one wasn't that bad, and the second one, they told me I could have one within maybe 3 months afterwards, and I had another one exactly 90 days later, and it was. Can you hear me okay? Okay, good. I know you can't hear me. Okay. And anyways, the second stroke was really a bad one. I was in church in a Sabbath school council meeting. We were teaching Sabbath school, and I felt it coming on about, I had maybe 3 or 4 or 5 minutes left, and I could feel my side getting numb. And so I knew it was happening, but I whispered a little prayer, Lord, just help me get through this. I only got a few more minutes, and I'll go to the hospital. And I did get through it, but when I went to go back down to the pew, I didn't make it. And so they called the ambulance. That's kind of embarrassing, but everybody in church is praying for me. And when I got to the hospital this time, I couldn't talk, I couldn't walk, I couldn't move my hands. It was a bad one. But while I was there, I got a little bit better. They gave me some medicine, and I was able to witness to a doctor and a couple nurses, and that kind of made it worthwhile. I felt like it was good for me. It only took 90 days before I was able to get back walking, talking. I had to have physical therapy and stuff, but God is still good. He brings us through stuff you can't imagine if we only trust in Him. The sources for the message today, called Waves, I used, of course, the Bible, the Seventh-day Adventist Bible commentary, a book called Desire of Ages, which is a great book if you haven't read it, and some archaeological writings. And the first thing I want to do today is to take a wrong picture out of your mind. When you see Jesus and the disciples in that little boat with the sail, you wonder how 12 people can fit in there, and 13. Well, those paintings of the little boat with the sail probably came from Rome, some of those famous painters over there, but that's not the way boats looked like on the Sea of Galilee. The Sea of Galilee is about 8 miles wide. Now, I live on Lake Winnebago, and right across from High Cliff, it's about 8 miles, so I can visually figure that out. But it's only about half as long as Lake Winnebago, so it wouldn't come down to Fond du Lac. It'd probably end someplace in Oshkosh. But the lake is very shallow on one side. So when you see those boats with the keels and the mast and the sails, not real. I looked this up archaeologically. I was just interested. And I found pictures of the boats back in Bible times. They're about 17 to 21 feet long, and they're flat bottom boats because, like Lake Winnebago, Lake of Galilee is very shallow. If they had keels, they couldn't get in close enough to unload anything. And none of them had sails, because with a flat bottom boat, a sail would tip you right over if you had and so what they had in this boats that were 17 to 21 feet long, 7 feet wide, about 3 feet high on the side. So what they had was oars. They had a space for 4 people to use oars. And so when you think about the disciples on the lake in the storm, they were rowing. And it made a lot of difference to me. Now, I have to tell you, I have read the Bible through more than 20 times, all the way through. I quit counting because it doesn't make any difference. I just like it. I read some every day. Every day, it seems like God gives you a little more insight into things. And sometimes when you really need something special, that's the absolute verse you're at that very day. And it's exciting when you do that to find out how God can lead you. I will admit, the last 10 or 12 years, I skipped a so-and-so begot so-and-so begot so-and-so because I'd read it before, so I just skipped over that part. But I learned something as I was studying for this sermon, other than the boat size. I learned a lot. And you know, when you've read the Bible through so many times, it's exciting when you learn something new. And so I wanted to share with you some of the things I learned today. First off, I want to ask you, have you ever thought, if you lived in the time of Jesus, and you're right there, and you could see him, and you could touch him, and you could listen to his voice, and you could feel the love he gave it. Have you ever thought it'd be easier to live back then? I suspect some of you might have thought that. But the story I'm going to tell you today shows you something a little bit different. Now, Jesus had just fed the 5,000 people, plus women and children, in front of his disciples with 5 loaves of bread, 2 fishes. Disciples were eyewitnesses to one of the greatest miracles that Jesus had done. Now, if you want to know what kind of relationship Jesus had with his disciples prior to this, we'll have to look in the book of Matthew. Chapter 5, Jesus heals great multitudes. They were there. They saw it. In chapter 6, he preaches to seek first the kingdom of God. They were there. They heard it. In chapter 7, he says, ask and it will be given. Seek and you will find. In chapter 8, he cleanses the leper. In chapter 10, verse 1, he gave the 12 disciples power to cast out devils and power to heal all diseases. That's 12 disciples, including Judas. I don't know if you ever thought about that, but Jesus gave him the power to cast out demons and to heal people also. But now, just after Jesus feeds the 5,000 women and children, his disciples are depressed. Did you know that? Let me tell you why. That big mass of people that were there watching him, Jesus told them he would meet them on the other side of the lake. He was going to go up in the mountain to pray for a bit, but he'd meet them over on the other side. He gave them a destination. As they went down the hill from where they had the feeding, and they got to the boat, one of the disciples started raising questions. Anybody have a guess who that might be? Yep, it was Judas. He started asking, why do you think that Jesus didn't proclaim himself king right then? Why didn't he tell people he was the Messiah? Is he ever going to do it? And now, as they're listening to Judas, they begin to have thoughts. Why hadn't Jesus saved John the Baptist from being beheaded? He could have just been an imposter, like the religious leaders said. They'd forgotten everything they'd seen just a few hours before, and their minds were so troubled, they actually spent hours down there talking about whether Jesus could be the Messiah or not. I learned this in the Bible commentary in the book Desire of Ages. So in a chapter called the Night on the Lake, I think it is. Night on the Lake. We heard about Jesus and what he was doing. Have you ever been, I could ask you, or had a mountaintop experience where things were just so good between you and God, and all of a sudden, something happened, doubt started entering into your mind. Not doubts really that Jesus the Messiah, but doubts, does he really love you? Doubts because you know yourself. You're not perfect. Am I good enough? God still loves me. He knows what a sinner I am on the inside. He knows the bad thoughts that still come into my mind sometimes from my past experiences. And then something goes wrong and you become depressed. And you feel like you're all alone again. Other people are happy. Things are working for them. It just doesn't seem like it's working for you right now. How do you deal with that? It only took a few hours for the disciples to have the miraculous mountaintop experience and then find themselves into despair. So it can happen to anybody. It's not a sin to feel lost. In fact, it might help some people because there's lots of people who don't feel lost than they are. But the devil works on all of us. I'm going to tell you a personal story about my mountaintop experience. Lots of you know I've had an insurance agency background. I bought an agency up in Neenah, and through God's help, I was able to pay that off in about 5 years. And I had hired a couple of employees, and one of them encouraged me, Mike, you got this, why don't you buy another one? And there was an older agent that was just across the street from us, and so I went to talk to Don and asked him if he'd like to sell his agency. And I found out later he was getting Alzheimer's. So he said, sure, I'll be glad to sell to you. So we fixed a price and worked things out, and I paid for that one too. And then I had an idea that God gave me on how to buy insurance agencies without borrowing any money. And it worked like a charm. And I went to older agencies, older agents that owned agencies, single ones usually. I told them, how about I give you a retirement plan? I'll buy your agency. I'll pay you a fixed price we'll work on. I'll pay you so much on whatever commissions come in. So you'll get all the money I promised, and it only could be sooner or later, depending on how the commissions come in. And I actually bought 5 more insurance agencies like that. I had 6 of them, and one of them in a credit union. And God was just blessing me, mountaintop. Everything was going so good. And then I had another idea. God gave me an idea to have a radio program. And because I had so many Christian clients, and I was friends with the people at WMI because I insured them already, I asked them if I could have a weekly radio program. And I explained to them I want to explain insurance policies to people. And they thought that'd be a good idea. And so I started doing that also. I had about 31 employees now, and it takes time to do all those radio programs. It's like a sermon. It takes me a month to put it together, so I can never be a preacher. You only have one sermon a month. But anyway, I put those radio programs in. I was busy. As I started getting more and more busy, I hate to tell you, but it's the truth. I started slacking on my Bible studies in the morning. But I was so busy. I had radio programs to do. I had employees to manage. I had, because of the radio program, we picked up 8,000 clients. And I had all those plus the agency ones that we bought. And so I was busy. And I'm ashamed to tell you, but my worship time lacked. So with 30 employees, I have to tell you, 25 of them are women. Now, I love women. Don't get that wrong. But I found out women don't like each other in the workplace. And they'd be tattling to me, this one took off early lunch. That one didn't file what you wanted to. And it's just a horrible thing to be the boss and have all these people come complaining all the time. And So I hired somebody to take care of that problem. But I still have all these other problems. And one day it got so bad, I said, Lord, what am I doing wrong? Why is all this happening to me? Things were so good. And the minute I said that, I realized that I was not spending time with him like I had before. And you know, Jesus is always our friend. And you know what? If you ever ask Jesus to tell you what's holding you back, what's the problem, I don't know about you, but he always lets me know. And then I have to deal with it. So I said, Lord, I'm sorry. It's like the Israelites. You know, when things were going so good for them, and things were just flowing, the money was flowing in, who'd they forget about? They forgot about the God that provided it all. And that can happen to us too. And it did happen to me. It wasn't I didn't love God yet. I did. It wasn't I didn't go to church yet. I did. It just that personal relationship had slipped. Now, Jesus was still my friend because he loves me, but I was not the good friend to him that I had been before. It's kind of like a marriage. Let's say that you got married, the girl of your dreams, and you wooed her and finally said, okay, I'll marry you. So you marry her, but you don't go home with her. You go back to where you used to live, and you never see her. But you send her letters every now and then, flowers on special holidays. And then you get together on an anniversary. How many anniversaries do you think you'd have living like that with a wife? Now, maybe some wives are more tolerant than others, I know, but I suspect you wouldn't have too many anniversaries before that relationship was gone. And it's the same with Jesus. You have to spend time with him. You can't expect him to stop, drop, and roll if you never spend time with him as a friend. So that's what I learned. I've since come to the conclusion it's not, just like it's not once saved, always saved, it's not once friends, always friends either. You have to work to maintain that friendship by spending time, talking, listening. Jesus is the best friend ever. He's always there, even when you're neglecting him. He still loves you. I want to ask you a question. How many of you ever been in a boat? Show that. Anybody been in a boat ever? Okay. Okay. You ever been in a boat where there's big waves? Anybody? Yeah? Yeah? How big? How big were the waves? Too big, I know, but maybe this big? Is that big enough for you? Maybe this big? I'm going to tell you a story. Some of you know, I put it in my first book I wrote. In my agency, I developed lots of business friends. And one of them wanted me to go up in Eskimo country. It's called Nunavut. It's on the northwest side of the Hudson Bay. And so we went up there on a hunting and fishing trip. We had to fly into this lake on the Hudson Bay, and we took boats and went farther back in. The Hudson Bay is an interesting place. There's no trees there. It's just no foliage at all. And so when a wind comes and there's no trees to slow it down, it goes pretty good. As we're out hunting, we go to different islands in class looking for caribou and things like that and fishing. One day we were driving in a boat. Now my Eskimo, I don't know his name, I couldn't pronounce it, but he was a good guy. He was very good with boats, and we were always the leader of the 5 boats that were with us. We were always the ones that led the way. So one day I looked and there's a backpack floating on the water, and I pointed to him and gestured to backpack, and he knew what that was. So we went over, I picked it up, and it was wet, soggy, and I opened it up, and inside were 2 wet granola bars, a pair of binoculars, a knife, and a few other small things. But the thing that shocked me was there was airplane tickets, return tickets to New York, still in the folder. And the fellow that I talked to, the Eskimo, he let me know that up there they lose about 6 to 9 people in that part of the country. Every year they die because of waves. There's polar bears up there. And so it mostly says college students. So evidently this was a college student who never made it back. And so that puts a little fear into you. So 5 days we've been there. We get a call on a satellite phone. There's a storm coming. We need to get back as soon as we can because it's like a hurricane-style storm. And they get those up north too, you know. And so as we're packing up, we had a 16-foot boat. You can, a lot shorter than maybe about 3/4 of that pew, 16-foot boat. I think there are 35-horse Evinrude motors on them. And when we packed it up, I had the camp cook in my boat with all of his cooking supplies. And I have to say the camp cook liked to eat his own food. He probably around 300 pounds or so. When we got everything packed up, there was like this much distance between the top of the boat and the water. And you know, that's not good. So I was a little nervous anyways. By the way, I'll tell you this. The water was about 37 degrees because it's up in the Arctic Circle. It never really gets that warm. And so they told us, don't put on your life preservers because if you go overboard, you're going to die anyways. Why make it take longer? And so we were sitting on our life preservers. As we're going out, we got around, there's a little hill. We got around that little hill. There's 4 boats behind us. I was in the lead boat because I think he was the best with water. And we got around this little hill, and all of a sudden the wind came up. And the waves went from 2 feet to 12 feet or more. Just huge waves. And our boat's overloaded. And so I was nervous. The guide decided we were going to go up over the wave to try to get to a little island that's about a mile away. So as he takes the boat, we got about 3/4 of the way up, and the wave crashed over our boat. And as it went by, took the life preservers, took the caribou, took lots of the cook's stuff with him, some of my stuff. Fortunately, my sleeping bag was under, so it stayed there. But we knew we couldn't do that. So he looked again and he thought, well, let's go on top of the waves to try to get there. So he did that. So he went at an angle up the side of the wave, got to the top, and we're going along the top of the wave, and all of a sudden a gust hit us, probably 70 to 90 miles an hour. And that blew us right. Next wave, when we hit it, the boat slammed into it. I went overboard. I was able to grab, if you know about Lunds, they got these little things where you put the oars in. I was able to grab one of those and pull myself back in. I thought I was a goner. But thank God I got back in the boat, sopping wet. And then he knew we couldn't go on top of the waves anymore, so he decided to go down the tunnel between the waves. I felt like Moses in the Red Sea with the waves on each side of us as we're going to this island, and we finally made it. The other boats that were behind us, they all turned around and went way, way around to stay in the shelter of whatever stuff there was. So we finally made it to the island. I got to, there's little shacks there on this island. It was an island where the Eskimos fished in the summertime. In the fall, they'd fish salmon, and they'd hang them out on racks and dry them, and that'd be part of their food supply. And they had little 4x8 sheets of plywood nailed together, no insulation, nothing, just nailed together. And as we got on shore, I thank God again I made it, but I saw smoke coming out of one of them. There's a fire, and I'm cold, and I'm wet, so I'm headed for that door where the fire is. I opened the door. There was an old Eskimo there, sitting on the floor. He smiled at me with all 4 teeth. The old Eskimo up there is 50. They don't live that long because of the harsh life. So he might have been 48 to 50 years old, but a big smile, 4 teeth. He motioned to me if I wanted some fish. He had some fish in a pot there. It looked like they're probably 4 or 5 days they'd been sitting there. It had flies all over. He had to flick the flies off as he ate the meat. And I said politely, no, thank you. And so the rest of the boats finally got there. We were 27 hours in those shacks before that hurricane-like force winds went by. Fortunately, my sleeping bag was hollow fill, so it kept the water away from me. If you're a camper, that's a good thing. And I finally warmed up by the fire. My friend finally made it. He and I picked out a little, what you call it, cabin, shed, whatever. Just floor, nothing, no padding, no chairs, it was bleak. But it kept the wind off us. And then he confessed to me, Mike, I've got 8 M&Ms I'll share with you. Well, he told me at 8. I don't know if that's truth or not, but anyways, I got my 4 M&Ms and I decided I might as well chug them and eat them right away because I'm hungry. So I ate my 4 M&Ms. 27 hours we were there waiting for the wind, and finally it passed by. We were able to continue on our way and get back to where we were. Tom and I talked about religious things as we were sitting there and how we all thought we were going to die, but we didn't. But it made me think about the disciples. Why things like that come into your head? That's exactly what I thought about. I thought about the storm the disciples were in. I thought how bad it must have been. And I thought with only oars, how hard it would be, because when you read Desire of Ages Night on the Lake, it says the wind was going exactly the opposite of where they were supposed to meet Jesus. And the waves, it's a shallow lake, the waves were big, and they got oars. And just as they're about to give up, they see something, a light. It's dark now, they see a light on the water. And it looks like it's going to go past them, but they're afraid because they think this light might be the angel of death. It's at least a bad omen. And then as it gets closer, they noticed it was Jesus. Peter was almost beside himself with joy. And they cry out to Jesus for help. And he says, be of good cheer. Don't be afraid. And there's something about this point that I just figured out. Jesus could have walked right up and stepped into the boat and calmed it all. But he didn't. You know what? I think he wants us to ask for help. We're in danger like that. Instead of just covering for us all the time like a protective mother and you never learn anything, he wants us to ask for his help. And the minute he asked for his help, Jesus was there. And then Peter, Peter, he's kind of an exuberant guy. Lord, if it's you, let me walk to you on the water. And Jesus said, come. Well, I learned this in the Bible commentary. Peter stepped out and he was walking towards Jesus, but he had a little bit of pride. He turned around to look at the other boat where the disciples were, hey guys, look at me. Look what I can do. And then when he turned back around, there was a wave between him and Jesus, and he started to sink. And he said, Lord, help me. And you know what? Whenever you ask Jesus to help you, he helps you, no matter what circumstances you're in. You might have been the dumbest person in the world to put yourself in a situation that caused all of this, but when you ask him for help, he helps, especially when it comes to salvation. Because you know when you need it, he's there. He'll save you. All you have to do is take a step in the right direction. Even if you're like the prodigal son and just came out of the pigsty, sloppy, dirty, and you ask Jesus to help you, he's there. It just takes one step to turn the right direction. Do you think when the prodigal son was walking towards home, the devil was telling him anything like, Father's not going to accept you. You took all the money and ran. He knows who you are. You might as well just turn around and go back. Or even better off, there might be a cliff you can jump off of someplace because the Father won't accept you. You know, that's the same thing the devil keeps telling us today. When you mess up, when you've gotten yourself deep into sin, the devil tells you, God doesn't love you anymore. You know what you did. You're worthless. And he wants to get us to turn around and give up. But don't do it. And then even on the way back, you might have a few slip and falls because we're human. And the devil will be there again, say, you knew you couldn't make it. Might as well just give up and go to hell with lots of your friends. You can have fun while you're here on earth. That's exactly what my sister told me one time. Said, Mike, I can't make it to go to heaven anyway. I might as well have fun while I'm here. But I got to tell you, I was praying for her and she turned her life around. And now she's back with God. And that's a good thing. But that's the way it works. You know, when we're on the way, the devil can distract us with work, relationships, other things that are going wrong, or just fun. Let's face it, lots of people get distracted by fun. But Jesus, I found out in Desire Ages, was on shore watching the disciples the whole time they were struggling. And just before he knew they were going to give up, he started walking on water to them. Sometimes we have to get to our very last rope before we're serious enough to accept what Jesus has to offer. I think about the other son, the one that never left the Father. And when the prodigal son came back and he was washed up and he was clean, and his father gave him his family ring back, the other son wasn't too happy. You know, I think the Father's house is representative of the church. You may have had some people leave your church, our church. And when they want to come back, you might be tempted to think, I know where you've been. I know what you're like. I don't trust you to come back. That's what the son that didn't leave the Father thought. And I think that's an example to us to show us that we need to be accepting of them just as much as the Father is accepting of us. Because at one time we were all lost. Let's face it, none of us are born saved. We're all lost. So I want to close today with a little thing I put on Facebook. My name, by the way, Michael J. Marta. If you want to find me on Facebook, I do what I call internet evangelism. I actually stalk evangelicals' website, and I talk to them about the Sabbath, and I talk to them about what happens when you die. And I get a bunch of people to argue with me sometimes. But I had somebody that I talked to. He was online in Australia when I was telling him about Doug Batchelor. And he said, that sounds interesting. I'm going to watch that. He contacted me. Can you imagine what an effect you can have no matter where you are if you do something like that? Friends from South Africa that follow me every day and all over the country. And I had people tell me, Mike, that was just what I needed that day. So I encourage you, if you're shy and you can't really have face-to-face with people, do something on the internet. There's so much bad out there. People are looking for good. So here's what I put up. 7 rules of life. First rule number 1, make a peace with your past so it won't disturb your future. Got that? Make a peace with your past so it won't disturb your future. Rule number 2, what other people think of you is none of your business. Don't worry about them. Just worry about you and God. Rule number 3, the only person in charge of your happiness is you and God, your relationship with Him. You know, online you see all these people have wonderful lives. You don't know what they're going through on the backside. So don't envy them. Rule number 4, don't compare your life to others, because comparison is a thief of joy. When you see how good you think they have it, the devil puts something in your heart thinking, how come you don't have it that good? You go to church every Sabbath, and you're still left behind. The devil works tricks like that, so don't compare yourself with others. Rule number 5 is time heals almost everything, so give it time. Rule number 6, stop thinking so much. It's all right to not know everything. You know, sometimes I think, well, judging on experience, I think that the female of the population might have a harder time now with the male, because things, my wife, she's mulling things over her head all night long. She'll wake up at 3 a.m. thinking of, did I do this? Did I do that? What do I have to do tomorrow? You know, and I never have that problem. Maybe it's just me. I go to sleep, I wake up in the morning thinking, great is thy faithfulness, because God is so good. Rule number 7, you don't own all the problems in the world. And I'll add, whatever problems you do own, have a little talk with Jesus, because He can make it all right. We just need to lean on Him. Dear Lord, we love You. We're thankful that You've given us Your Holy Spirit to lead us and guide us. We ask You to help us to listen to You. Lord, be with us when we fall, when we sin. Keep us close to You. Give us strength to fulfill what You have for our lives. And we thank You for hearing this prayer. In Jesus' name, amen.